it's really interesting. In the last year or so, surrealism has been picked up by many kind of a culture players out there, and I saw a few of them during the summer. There's a great show at Tate Modern in London called Surrealism Beyond Borders. That is more of a kind of a wider look at surrealism as an international movement rather than just being led from Paris or a European hub.
You were sort of inspired when we did the pre-call and talking about the return of surrealism and how kind of this is the third time this has happened. The first time in the 1900s, then the 1960s, and now it's sort of coming back now. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that is and what interests you about it?
There's something in this moment that a lot of things are happening that are surreal, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, if I go back to early 1900s, it was actually kind of a Dada as the first movement that started to kind of reacting to kind of the changing landscape in everyday reality. So there was early kickoffs by Marcel Duchamp in 1913 or so, and then the Dada centers in Zurich and New York, 1950s, 1960s, and later in Paris in 20s. And surrealism can be seen as or can consider to be a continuation of Dada, when Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic work was also picked up by artists, especially with André Breton, who kind of advocated for all this free association and dream analysis and the unconscious in general, in order to kind of help to liberate new ideas and imagination. And in 1924, there was his manifesto of surrealism, where he defined this term as something that tries to resolve dream and reality into an absolute reality, which is surreality. And both Dada and surrealism were these reactions to similar things that we're seeing in our environment today. So one thing is science was pushing the boundaries of reality. Back in the day, it was led by Albert Einstein and his thinking, and there was this new interest in mind and self and dream and the unconscious through Freud's work. But then there was a lot of technological innovations, such as the radio transmissions and the airplane and talking motion pictures and color photography and even the first robots. And surrealists, they were ones who were really picking up on new technology. There's a lot of films, a lot of photography work, and they were kind of forefront of tech as well. But then there were a few things like the horrors of World War I were present. There was the continued pandemic, the Spanish flu in 1918 to 1920 or so. So interestingly, these few kind of things that were kind of in the ethos at the moment that are very similar today. And so as the reality was getting weirder and weirder and sometimes even unrecognizable, the art did the same thing, abandoning a linear thinking. And I think it's similarly to today. There was also the optimism around how it was not all negative. There was a possibility of transformation, transformation of human and our connections, and how we understand more of ourselves through the kind of psychoanalytic work. And so I think that might get sometimes lost, that there is the optimism that is kind of hidden in there, and it's again seen in by the adoption of new technology as well. And then when we look at later, in post World War II, the similarities that we're seeing to today are, I think, this threefold. There's three directions where folks were going at that time and where we're going now. So there was the outer world explorations, like going to the space, going to the moon. We have now, folks looking at going to the Mars and even beyond. And then there was the journeys inside, like looking at mind and the wellness and understanding of psychedelics and new therapy models and everything. Like that's very similar to what's happening today as well. And then again, the rise of new technologies. The computer really started in the 1950s, and mass media, television, and connected networks. And now we're in a place where we're looking at, what is the next computing platform and metaverse and so on. So interesting, similarities between these few moments in the last 100 years.
I think as humans, as companies, as brands, we always believe that we are unique and special and are, kind of breaking new ground and doing new things. And when you speak to historians or, anyone who has sort of a sense of the past, it's these big sort of cycles that play themselves out. And while the metaverse and all the related technologies might feel strange, they are ostensibly the same thing, just in a slightly different, slightly newer format. And the experience is still going to be very human, and emotions are going to play out the same way, and human behavior is going to mimic similar things that have come before.
Yeah, what's not changing is that we're going to be human beings, like in all these times, and we have the similar needs. We have the kind of the core human aspects. They're not going anywhere. It's less, the surroundings are changing, and we're trying to adapt. It's really interesting. In the last year or so, surrealism has been picked up by many kind of a culture players out there, and I saw a few of them during the summer. There's a great show at Tate Modern in London called Surrealism Beyond Borders. That is more of a kind of a wider look at surrealism as an international movement rather than just being led from Paris or a European hub. So that's a traveling show that was in I think it was in the Met in New York late last year. But that was one thing, and interesting. There was I went to Venice Biennale. There was one of the main shows called Milk of Dreams was in the Central Pavilion. But then also, like beyond these kind of art venues, I went to Salone del Mobile in Milan in early June, and even within the furniture design, you could see kind of a commentary towards consumer culture and what's expected in industrial design through kind of a surrealist approaches. Like there was a interesting mixes of elements that you don't normally see together, like a chair that's part a tennis racket and part something you sit on. And it's just like very very similar to things that you could have seen in the early 1900s.
Having spent a lot of time observing kind of the art and creativity that's happening in kind of Web3 and the brands that are being built, there is a little bit of this sort of strange oddness, surrealism, escapism playing out in those visuals. And I think people like Gucci and Tiffany's have sort of caught onto that a bit and sort of experimented with it a little bit. So it is starting to bleed out into popular culture.
A big thing that's needed in both science fiction and then making science fiction real is this sense of optimism in general. Like, and I have a lot of research that's looking at like how there's almost like forced optimism in this moment right now. Like we've been, with pandemic and everything, like all the tragedies we've had in the last few years, like they are pushing people to a place where they are craving for joy and optimism.